What if Luffy had Blackbeard's devil fruit? How would the story turn out? How would Marineford change? How would he fight with this bizarre fruit? Well, imagine this. The party's bar smelled like salt and old rum when Luffy grabbed the strange purple fruit before Shanks could stop him. Teeth sank in. The taste was wrong. Cold, bitter, nothing like food should be. And the room dimmed half a shade around him. Nobody plans on eating the most dangerous fruit in the world by accident. But nobody warned a hungry 7-year-old what he was reaching for either. The floor beneath him didn't burn. It simply stopped existing, swallowed into a spreading black nothing that ate table, chair, wall, before sealing shut as fast as it opened. Luffy dropped to his knees, gasping, hands shaking like they belonged to someone else. Years folded past in the space between one breath and the next. The day the Lord of the Coast came for Shanks, Luffy was already running toward the water instead of away from it, because some small, hard part of him had learned, in all those years of grabbing what he shouldn't, that letting go of people cost more than holding on ever did. The Sea King's jaws opened wide enough to swallow the boat whole. Luffy's hand shot out, not toward Shanks, but past him, straight into the beast's open mouth, into all that mass and muscle, and pulled. Gravity answered. The Sea King's whole body lurched sideways mid-lunge, yanked off its line by a boy half its weight, jaw snapping shut a foot short of where Shanks stood frozen. The pull cost Luffy everything it took. He felt his own ribs strain against the force he'd summoned. Blood in his mouth, vision going white at the edges. He hit the deck unconscious before he saw the Sea King retreat. Shanks knelt over him, both arms still whole, staring down at a boy who'd just traded his own body to save the man who was supposed to be watching over him. "You idiot," Shanks whispered, voice breaking. "You're supposed to let me protect you." Years later, a straw hat sat on a small boat pointed toward the Grand Line, carrying a boy the world had no myth ready for yet. Alabasta burned around them, rebels and royal guard tearing each other apart on Crocodile's orders, and Vivi's scream cut through the chaos when the throne room doors blew open. Crocodile didn't bother drawing his hook. "The rubber trick doesn't work on sand, boy. What exactly are you planning to punch?" "Not planning to punch anything," Luffy said, wiping blood from his split lip. "Just gonna grab you." He'd said as much to Vivi before the fight even started. No water tricks this time, no clever setup. Just distance, close the hard way. Without rubber, Luffy can't stretch through sand the way Can and Luffy could. But nullification doesn't care what shape a logia takes. The instant Luffy's hand finds real skin under all that sand, Crocodile stops being intangible whether he wants to or not. Crocodile dissolved into a column of sand the moment Luffy closed the gap, reforming behind him with contemptuous ease. "You'll tire yourself out chasing smoke, then I'll stop chasing." Luffy didn't turn around. He waited, counted the half-second it took Crocodile to solidify enough to swing his hook, and lunged backward into the reforming column before it finished settling. His hand closed on flesh mid-transformation. Crocodile's whole body seized as the sand simply refused to answer him anymore. No dispersal, no reform, nothing but a man standing in his own throne room, suddenly, catastrophically touchable. "What? Got you." Luffy's grip locked, and he didn't let the moment's shock go to waste. A headbutt cracked into Crocodile's nose before the warlord's brain caught up to what had happened. Then a knee, then a graceless tangle of a brawl with no elegance in it at all. Both men trading real, ugly hits because neither of them had anywhere left to hide. Crocodile's counter opened a gash along Luffy's cheek. Luffy didn't loosen his grip to block it. "You'd rather bleed than let go," Crocodile said, breathing hard now, hook scraping uselessly against a boy who wouldn't release him long enough to use it properly. "Yeah." Luffy spat blood onto the throne room floor and drove his forehead into Crocodile's jaw one more time, finishing it. "Guess I just don't know a better way to fight." Vivi's father rose from where he'd been left broken on the steps, staring at the boy who'd beaten a warlord not with power, but with the simple, brutal refusal to ever let go. Crocodile's defeat still hung over Alabasta's rebuilt streets when the woman with the folded arms found their table at the cafe. "I want to join your crew," Robin said, calm as still water. "You didn't ask what I've done, most captains would have." "Don't care what you did," Luffy said, mouth full. "Just care if you want to come." She studied him a moment longer. A boy carrying a power the whole world had spent decades being taught to fear, wearing it like it weighed nothing at all. "A D who commands the dark instead of running from it," she said, almost to herself. "That's new." Robin spent 20 years being hunted for knowledge the world called dangerous. A captain who isn't afraid of dangerous things is exactly the kind of person she's been looking for without knowing it. The log pose reset skyward soon after. dragging them toward Jaya, where Mocktown's dockside taverns were loud with rookie pirates trading rumors. Bellamy's laughter cut through the noise first, mocking the idea of Sky Island loudly enough that Luffy nearly put a fist through his teeth before Zoro talked him down. No need to burn a fight they didn't need. In the corner, unnoticed by anyone that night, a big man with a crescent scar watched the East Blue rookie with the black smoke fruit a little too closely and said nothing at all. They found the knock-up stream 2 days later and rode a geyser of ocean straight up into the clouds. Skypie's golden ruins glittered wrong under a sun that felt too close, and Enel was waiting in the middle of them, lightning coiled lazy around his shoulders. "You should be dead already," Enel said, watching Luffy climb back up for the 6th time. "A human body doesn't survive what I've put through it." "Guess I'm bad at dying." Luffy's whole right side was smoking, skin blackened along one arm. "Gonna have to try harder." Rubber's immunity to electricity was never part of this fruit. What happens next has no clean precedent. It's supposed to cost him everything it takes. Enel's next bolt came as a spear of pure current. Luffy didn't dodge it. He opened his arms and let the void in his chest try to swallow it whole. Darkness straining against something physics never built it to hold. Voltage tore through muscle anyway, a scream ripping loose from him before he could stop it, smoke hissing off blackened skin. He didn't fall. He staggered forward instead, half blind, and got a hand on Enel's arm mid-current. The lightning didn't taper off. It simply stopped, mid-arc, current dying in a body that had gone, all at once, entirely human. "That's not possible," Enel said, staring at his own useless hands. "Yeah." Luffy's grip held even as his legs finally buckled, dragging them both to the golden stone together. Everyone keeps saying that. Gold from Skypiea filled the Mary's hold as they dropped back to the Blue Sea, and the first ship they crossed paths with belonged to an admiral. Aokiji didn't draw his ice. He just looked at Luffy for a long moment, something unreadable behind tired eyes. "World government's got a file on that fruit," he said finally. "Thickest one I've ever seen for something nobody's supposed to know exists. Calls it the worst devil fruit ever grown. That's not a nickname, kid. That's an official classification." "Doesn't feel evil," Luffy said. "Just feels like mine." "Hope you're right about that." Aokiji let them pass without another word. "This fruit doesn't need a history of misuse to be feared. The world government already classified it as catastrophic before anyone in this timeline ever wielded it at all. Luffy's the first person the file has ever had to describe." They limped into Water 7 on a hull held together by rot and stubbornness, and left it in pieces. Icebergs warning about the coming storm arriving just ahead of CP9's true faces. By the time Robin walked into the sea alone, mouthing words no one else understood, the crew already knew what came next. Enies Lobby's walls were built for men, not gods, and Rob Lucci made that plain within the first exchange, a Soru step closing distance faster than Luffy's eye could track, a fist landing before Luffy finished registering the gap had closed at all. He hit the ground hard, twice, 3 times, always a half-second too slow. "You're not fast enough to matter here," Lucci said, shifting mid-stride into something leopard-shaped and merciless. "Then I'll get faster," Luffy said, spitting blood, and reached for something he'd never tried on purpose. Pulling gravity tight around his own legs instead of an enemy's body, a well of pull aimed inward. The first attempt threw him into a wall. The second barely moved him. The third worked. He shot forward faster than he'd ever moved, gravity yanking his own mass ahead of itself, and closed the gap before Lucci's leap finished, hand catching firm mid-transformation, nullification snapping the zone shift back to plain human skin at the worst possible moment for a man mid-air. Lucci hit the ground human, exposed, and Luffy's fist finished it. They said goodbye to the Mary with tears nobody bothered hiding, and sailed out on the Sunny's maiden voyage into a fog-choked triangle, where the dark pressing in from every side felt, to Luffy alone among the crew, uncomfortably like looking in a mirror. Fog swallowed the Sunny whole as it drifted into Thriller Bark's shoreline, and the first shadow that greeted them belonged to a man who wanted Luffy's more than any treasure on board. "Darkness!" Gecko Moria said, delighted, zombie hordes shambling behind him across the rotting deck. "How poetic. A boy made of shadow, come to have his shadow stolen anyway." "You're not taking anything of mine," Luffy said. "Everyone says that." Moria's hand rose and threads of shadow magic reached for the ground beneath Luffy's feet, the same trick that had stripped 100 victims bare before this one. "Moria's whole power is built around shadows as something separable from a person, a piece you can cut away and wear like a coat. Nobody's ever tried that on a boy whose entire body is already made of the stuff he's trying to steal. The threads touched Luffy's shadow and simply kept going, past resistance Moria expected and into something that pulled back. Moria's confident grin faltered. What? The void didn't let go of what reached into it. It swallowed the reaching hand's worth of power whole, darkness answering darkness, and for one impossible second Luffy's silhouette stretched 40 feet tall against the fog, a shape built entirely of absorbed shadow magic looming over the deck before collapsing back down into an exhausted smoking boy on his knees. Moria didn't get up again after that. They should have had time to breathe. They didn't get it. Kuma arrived on the tail end of the fight calm as still water, offering to erase every crew member's exhaustion with a touch. One by one they accepted, grateful, unaware what the offer actually cost until Zoro stepped forward last and asked the real question. Luffy's pain, Zoro said. The stuff he's been swallowing all fight, every hit he's taken that hurt twice over. You can move that instead. Onto me. Kuma's expression didn't change. You understand it will be doubled. His fruit does not lessen a burden, it only relocates it. I understand. Zoro didn't hesitate. Do it anyway. Sanji was the first to notice something was wrong. Hours later, Zoro slumped against the mast, breathing too shallow, skin gone the color of old paper. He shouted for Chopper before he'd even finished crossing the deck, and Chopper worked through the night on a wound that wasn't a wound at all, just debt, paid in full, by a man who'd known exactly what he was signing up for, and chosen it without blinking. Zoro's color came back slow over the following days, Chopper hovering by his side long after the wound had technically closed, and by the time the Sunny reached Sabaody Archipelago, the whole crew had unspoken permission never to let Kuma make that offer again. Sabaody's canopy of bubble trees glittered gold-green overhead, and it was Hachi's warning about slave auctions that put them on a collision course with something none of them were ready for, a celestial dragon, standing over a beaten mermaid like she was furniture. Luffy hit him before anyone could stop him. The crack of knuckle on privileged flesh went through the whole plaza like a gunshot, and every marine and bystander in earshot froze the same way, waiting for the sky itself to answer. Striking a celestial dragon is treated, across the whole world, as an act of war against the entire government structure. Luffy already carries a fruit classified as catastrophic. This is the first time both facts collide in public. It didn't take long. Kizaru arrived in a streak of gold light, already mid-sentence before his boots touched ground. That's quite the temper for someone carrying quite the fruit. Don't care what you think about it, Luffy said. Get out of my way. He tried. Gravity gathered tight around his own legs, the same trick that had beaten Lucci, and he shot forward faster than he'd ever moved before. Kizaru was already gone from where he'd been standing. Luffy hit empty air, stumbled, turned. Kizaru's foot found his ribs from a direction he hadn't even registered as a threat. Lightspeed movement making a mockery of every gravity well trick Luffy had spent weeks earning. He got a hand on the Admiral's sleeve once, half a second of contact, enough to feel Kizaru's body go solid and hittable for the length of a heartbeat, before the grip broke and the Admiral simply wasn't there to hold on to anymore. Fast, Kizaru said, mild as ever, standing over him. Not fast enough, though. Then Kuma's palm found him, and the world folded away. Luffy woke alone on a beach of pink sand, sun too bright overhead, no crew, no ship, nothing but silence and a newspaper someone had left folded nearby. Ace's face on the front page, execution date printed beneath it in stark black ink. He didn't move for a long time. Then he stood, hands shaking, and started walking toward the water. He was done losing people he could have grabbed onto in time. Hancock found him half-drowned on Amazon Lily's shore and gave him a boat before he'd even finished explaining why he needed one. Impel down doesn't let people out, she said. Only in, and only once. Then I'll be the first, Luffy said, and she didn't argue further, because something in his face told her arguing wouldn't change anything about where he was going next. The great prison rose out of the sea like a wound the ocean had never healed, and Magellan met him on level 4 with poison already dripping from an outstretched hand. Rubber boys don't survive level 4, Magellan said, venom pooling thick around his fingers. Whatever you are instead won't fare better. Canon Luffy's rubber body resisted poison naturally. This Luffy has no such gift. Swallowing this attack the way he swallowed Enel's lightning would mean absorbing something that eats him from the inside out, instead of just burning him. Luffy didn't reach for it. He'd learned that lesson the hard way already. Weeks of practice teaching him gravity could push as easily as it pulled. And instead of drawing the poison into himself, he built a wall of dense, churning dark between them, holding the venom at bay a full arm's length from his skin, straining under a weight of pressure that felt like carrying the ocean itself on one outstretched hand. Magellan pushed harder. Luffy's knees buckled, sweat and blood mixing on his face, and still he held the line. "Not gonna let it touch me," he said through gritted teeth. "Not today." He broke through level 5 with the wall still barely holding, and it was in the depths of level 6, chained among the world's worst, that he found the last man he expected. Marshal D. Teach, gaunt, furious, stripped of the fruit he'd spent a lifetime chasing before ever getting the chance to steal it. "You," Teach said, recognizing the smoke curling faint off Luffy's shoulders instantly. "That's mine. That was supposed to be mine. Wasn't ever yours," Luffy said. "Guess that's why you're in here instead of out there." Teach's laugh was ugly, hollow, a man caught trying to carve out by force what fate had already handed to someone else. A failed raid on the vault below, chasing rumor of a second god-tier fruit to replace the one he'd lost his shot at. Luffy left him there, chained, and kept moving. He hit the surface with Ace's name still on his lips, and a stolen marine ship waiting to carry him toward Marineford. Marineford's bay was already a battlefield by the time the stolen marine ship broke through its outer line, cannon fire lighting the smoke in flashes of orange and white. Luffy didn't wait for the ship to dock. He went over the rail into open water and gravity pulled himself the rest of the way, landing hard on sand already slick with blood that wasn't his yet. Aokiji's ice had turned half the bay into a frozen field, and it was through that field Luffy ran straight toward the execution platform where his brother knelt in chains. This war was never going to be won with strength alone. The plan, if it can be called that, was always just to reach the platform before the axe fell, whatever that took. A wall of Marines closed around him, blades raised, and Luffy didn't slow down to fight them properly. He grabbed the nearest one by the wrist mid-swing, nullification stripping a hidden devil fruit-forged blade back to plain steel before it could cut him, and used the man's own stumbling weight to shove through the gap he'd left behind. He reached the scaffold as the axe began its fall. His hand closed around the blade's edge instead of Ace's chains, void swallowing the impact whole, metal groaning under a pressure it was never built to survive. It shattered. Ace's chains came apart a heartbeat later under a grip that had learned across 100 fights exactly how much force it took to break something without breaking with it. Luffy. There wasn't time for anything else. Akanu's fist was already a molten arc cutting toward them both. Magma glowing white bright at its core, faster than either of them could clear the platform in time. Luffy threw himself in front of it. The fist hit his chest, and the darkness in him strained to absorb what physics never built it to hold, swallowing what it could of the heat while the rest tore through flesh anyway. A rare defense bought, as always, at a price the fruit never once discounted. He felt ribs give way somewhere under the burn. He didn't let go of Ace's arm. "You shouldn't have." Ace's voice cracked, horror playing on his face at the wound smoking on his brother's chest. "Wasn't gonna lose you too," Luffy said, blood on his teeth, and dragged them both off the platform before Akainu could finish what he'd started. Whitebeard caught them both before they hit the sand, one massive hand steadying Luffy's ruined stance while the other kept Ace upright. "Boy took a magma fist meant for you," Whitebeard said to Ace, disbelief and something like awe-fighting for space on his scarred face. "And he's still standing." "Barely," Luffy managed, blood on his teeth, ribs grinding wrong with every breath. "In the world this war was supposed to happen in, Ace died on this beach with his father watching. That isn't the story unfolding here, and it's worth sitting with why, for just a moment, before the war finishes taking everything else it came for." Whitebeard's eyes found the black smoke still curling faint off Luffy's shoulders, and something old and calculating moved behind them. The look of a man re-evaluating, mid-battle, exactly how much the world had just changed because one boy in the East Blue reached for the wrong fruit on a table years ago. "You bought my son time nobody else could have bought him," Whitebeard said. "That's a debt I don't forget." He didn't get the chance to say more than that. Squard's blade found him from behind moments later, a wound that should never have landed on a man of his caliber, and Blackbeard's crew, Teach still rotting in Impel Down's level 6, his ambitions this time belonging to someone else entirely, never got the chance to finish what history once wrote for them. It didn't matter. Whitebeard's body had been failing long before any blade touched it, and no amount of intervention from a rubberless boy with a stolen fruit was ever going to change the ending written into his own chest. He went down standing, the way legends are supposed to, unwounded on his back. The war's death toll cut brutally short around him, but his own ending arriving regardless, exactly as it always would have. Luffy watched it happen from Ace's side, too wrecked to reach him in time, and understood, in the sudden silence that followed, that some things his fruit could touch, and some things it never could. They sailed out of Marineford alive, all of them, a war's outcome rewritten everywhere except the one death that had never been about tactics at all. Weeks later, healing on Rusakaina, under Rayleigh's watch, Luffy finally asked the question he'd been carrying since Sabaody. "Teach me to fight without getting hit so much." Rayleigh studied him a long moment. "That's not strength, boy. That's hockey. About time you learned it properly." 2 years of training under Rayleigh's watch had taught Luffy things the fruit itself never could. Observation hockey to see a hit coming before it landed. Armament to harden his own skin against damage he could no longer absorb away for free. And conquerors, raw and unbidden, the same pressure that had once rolled off Whitebeard without effort. He returned to Sabaody a different fighter than the one Kizaru had scattered. The crew reunited at the appointed grove. Scars and stories exchanged in a rush, and it was mid-reunion that the first pacifista dropped from the canopy, mechanical and merciless. Targeting systems already locking onto the boy the world government's files had spent 2 years calling the single greatest threat left uncontained. A pacifista is built to survive nearly anything a devil fruit user can throw at it. Armor, hockey-resistant plating, firepower built off a warlord's own copied strength. Nobody built it to survive what happens when gravity itself decides to collapse around it. "Zoro, everyone, stay back," Luffy said, and for the first time, nobody argued. He didn't grab for a limb this time, didn't look for skin to nullify. He planted his feet, conqueror's hockey bleeding out around him in a wave that dropped birds mid-flight from the canopy overhead, and reached inward for the fruit's oldest, ugliest trick, the one he'd spent 2 years learning to survive using, instead of merely surviving. Darkness poured out of him in a collapsing sphere, gravity folding in on itself around the pacifista's chassis, metal groaning, then screaming, then imploding into a point smaller than a fist. The light in its eyes guttered out before the crush finished. Silence settled over the grove. "That's new," Zoro said finally. "Quiet." "Yeah." Luffy let the hockey fade, exhausted but standing. No blood on his teeth this time. No ribs grinding wrong beneath his shirt. 2 years had bought him a version of this power that didn't cost him everything just to survive using it. Getting better at it, across the world. In a room built for 5, the file on the Emperor of Shadows was updated one final time before the meeting adjourned. No longer a curiosity, no longer a rumor out of the East Blue, but a confirmed, standing threat to everything the old order had built. Not because he wanted the world to fear him, because he'd refused, every single time it mattered, to let go of the people counting on him to hold on. The Straw Hats regrouped at the water's edge as the sun came up over Sabaady's bubble glass trees. A new destination waiting beneath the waves. Fishman Island. Then the New World. A boy who was never supposed to survive his own fruit, sailing on anyway. Not the sun god this world already had a myth for, but a new one, still being written, one grip at a time.